put the slides up, or do you put them up?
Uh, Whatever is better for you, Michelle. We have no problem in we could put them upload them. I don't know. What do you prefer?
I think it might be easier just so I can click through them.
Okay. So
And
why don't we try?
okay.
Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Down in the screen, you should have an icon that says share.
Let's see if this works.
Yeah, no, perfect. It's coming.
Do you see it?
Not yet.
Not
There.
yet.
Okay. Now we need to see it in a full screen.
Oh, okay.
Always when I have the issue.
There.
You can see it okay?
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Be a little patient with me if I stumble around, but I think this might be easier so I can slip through it.
Yes, no problem.
Okay.
Michelle. No,
Thank you so much.
we are very relaxed, actually. We've done so many webinars right now that we try to make it friendly for everyone who participates. That's no problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys are Latin America where everybody's kind of relaxed, right? That's the reputation.
Well, not exactly for Chile.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yes. We're known by the Swedish or from Switzerland from the Latin America.
Oh, okay, yeah. So you're the Swiss of the Latin American countries. Got it.
Yes.
I'll stay on time then. That's why we're starting at 9:02. I get it now.
Yeah. But don't worry. There's someone else with your name as well, Michelle Brouhard.
Oh,
How strange. That's Michael.
Buenos
yeah,
días.
that's right.
Hi,
I don't know
Michael.
why
Good
he knows my
morning.
name.
Muy
Why do you
raro.
have-
Muy raro el nombre, ¿no?
Muy raro. Actually, it is very strange.
Maybe he didn't click on the right link. Maybe that was the issue.
Oh,
¿Importa o no importa?
Maybe you can change your name. Let me see if I can change.
I just changed my name.
Oh, there it is. Perfect. Now
Pero
you're Michael.
funciona, Matías, ¿funciona así? ¿O salgo de regreso?
No. Está
Ok.
perfecto.
Aquí estoy. Disculpa, Michelle, Michael, Michael, Miguel, Mijale en griego.
Perfect. We can go along with whatever you feel like. But Michael, it seems fine.
Ok, muy bien, aquí estoy.
Michael, do you have ¿tienes láminas?
Por supuesto, soy consultor.
Muy bien. Entonces, ¿tú nos mandaste las láminas?
Todavía no.
Ok.
Pero según Luis, te voy a pasar yo mismo compartido mi pantalla.
Si quiere, bueno, lo podíamos hacer nosotros también, pero igual nos gustaría que nos mandaran las láminas después.
Sí.
Okay. And do
Seguro.
you want to try right now with sharing
Yeah,
your...
I'm just getting it off of a link and onto my C drive.
Okay.
Porque presentando de una liga no funciona porque hay un... Pero acabo de llegar de Singapur mi presentación de la colega. Un momentito.
Okay. So where are you right now?
Montreal.
Okay.
Sí.
So Michelle is in New York, you are in Montreal, and Matías is in Punta Arenas, the southest city in the world, I would say. Maybe Ushuaia, I don't know, but...
It's a dispute. I don't think it's why it's a city, but that's a different question.
He's almost about to go in a how to say a crucero,
A cruise,
cruiser to the Antarctic. So he's a privilege.
Wow. Estoy celoso, muy celoso. Esta está mi lista.
Yeah, we're all jealous, Matías, with your trip.
Ok, déjame ver. Está.
Michael, if you want, because we're about to start, if you want to send them to Luis and he can share them for you. Is that possible?
Puede ser más lento. Déjame ver, ya está.
Okay.
Ya está. Okay. Voy a probar ahorita. Disculpa, screen one. Esto.
Ahí viene.
¿Lo ve?
Sí, falta en full screen.
Sí. Ya ven la presenter mode, supongo.
No, it's not full screen yet. You have to,
Ya,
there it
ya está.
goes.
Ok,
Perfect,
perfecto. Ok,
wonderful.
funciona.
Okay,
Vamos.
thank you so much. So we're going to start right away. It's 9:02. Normally we start very sharply. So I'm going to switch to Spanish. Queridos amigos, les recuerdo que este evento cuenta con traducción simultánea español-inglés, inglés-español, para la que tienen que elegir el idioma, para el que quieren traducción en la imagen de globo en la parte inferior de sus pantallas. Les informo igualmente que esta actividad está siendo transmitida en vivo a través de LinkedIn. Please remember that simultaneous translation Spanish-English, English-Spanish is being provided for this event. You just need to click on the icon of a globe at the bottom of your screen and select the language for which you need interpretation. This event is also being streamed on LinkedIn. Buenos días y gracias por sumarse a otro de nuestros seminarios digitales. El propósito del webinar de hoy es el de analizar e intentar proyectar las repercusiones del conflicto en Medio Oriente, dada su incidencia crítica en la seguridad energética global. El bloqueo o la inestabilidad en el estrecho de Hormuz no solo compromete el suministro de hidrocarburos, sino también de productos esenciales como fertilizantes y químicos, fundamentales para las cadenas de valor. Este escenario ha profundizado la crisis logística preexistente, consolidando un ciclo inflacionario derivado del encarecimiento energético. Para Chile, el efecto es directo y severo. La vulnerabilidad de la infraestructura en el Golfo Pérsico anticipa que la recuperación será lenta, incluso bajo un cese de hostilidades. El conflicto ha actuado como un catalizador de las tensiones geopolíticas previas, sumando al proteccionismo un aumento exponencial en las primas de riesgo y una reconfiguración de las rutas marítimas. La imprevisibilidad y magnitud de esta crisis impactan de manera transversal a nuestra economía y a la de nuestros principales socios comerciales. Con este escenario sobre nuestras cabezas, hemos considerado de la máxima importancia armar un panel internacional y nacional de consumados expertos que aborde todas estas dimensiones y nos ayude a un mejor entendimiento con respecto a qué atenernos y cómo, en lo posible, avanzar a pesar de las peligrosas tormentas que nos aquejan. Paso entonces a presentar a nuestros distinguidos expositores. Michelle Brouhard, quien se conecta desde Nueva York, es la directora de Políticas y Riesgo Geopolítico en Kpler, donde trabaja en la intersección de los mercados globales de materias primas y las políticas públicas. En Kpler, Michelle colabora con los responsables políticos en la dinámica del mercado y asesora a los participantes del mercado sobre la evolución geopolítica y regulatoria. Anteriormente trabajó durante 25 años como operadora de materias primas en Wall Street, especializándose en los mercados energéticos, de la que es una reconocidísima experta mundial. Adicionalmente, Michelle forma parte de uno de los comités del Consejo Nacional del Petróleo, institución que asesora al secretario de Energía de Estados Unidos en materias relacionadas con el petróleo y el gas, y es frecuentemente citada en varios de los medios de comunicación más influyentes del mundo, como The Economist, Bloomberg y CNBC, entre otros. Michael McAdoo es el socio y director de comercio global. Es el socio, y director de comercio global e inversiones del Boston Consulting Group, con sede en Montreal, Canadá. Durante más de 25 años, Michael ha trabajado en el nexo de la estrategia corporativa, las políticas públicas y la geopolítica internacional. Ha sido miembro del equipo directivo del primer ministro de un país del G7 y ejecutivo de alto nivel responsable de estrategia, comercio internacional y desarrollo de negocios internacionales. Ha resuelto con éxito disputas comerciales y/o barreras de acceso al mercado en Estados Unidos, la Unión Europea, Rusia, China y Brasil. Michael también es miembro de la junta directiva de ICICI Bank Canadá, y Michael comenzó su carrera como miembro del personal del Parlamento de Canadá, donde ascendió hasta convertirse en asistente ejecutivo del primer ministro. Finalmente, pero no por ello menos importantes, Matías Pinto es socio en Geogic Consulting, exdirector del Departamento Económico de la Embajada de Chile en Washington, D.C., cargo que ejerció entre los años 2018 y 2022, y ex Sustainability Policy Lead para las Américas en Microsoft. Adicionalmente, Matías dirigió el Comité Técnico de Geopolítica de la Estrategia Nacional de Minerales Críticos de Chile. Es columnista del Diario Financiero de Chile y conferencista en múltiples foros. Abogado con más de 14 años de experiencia en geopolítica, comercio internacional, regulación ambiental y sostenibilidad corporativa, Matías Máster en International Business and Policy de la Universidad de Georgetown y Master of Laws en Derecho Ambiental de la Universidad de Chile. Sin más, le voy a ceder la palabra a la primera de nuestras invitadas, que será Michelle, quien se concentrará especialmente en el tema energético, a quien le seguirá Michael, quien ahondará en los asuntos de comercio internacional, y Matías, quien pondrá la lupa sobre el escenario más local en Chile. Y desde ya los invito a que hagan sus preguntas, ya sea en el icono de chat o el de Q&A que tienen en la parte de abajo de sus pantallas. Sin más, le cedo la palabra a Michelle. Michelle, you have the floor, and thank you so much for joining us today again.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for having me. I'm going to try to upload my slides onto here, so just give me 1 minute.
Don't worry.
Okay, we got it. Here we go.
It's coming.
It's coming. Okay, you can see it, yes?
Not yet. There. Now we need to see it full screen.
Okay, I clicked the button. There we go. Okay, we're good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just want to say thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure communicating back and forth with Lewis. And I want to use like the next 10 minutes or so to trace a line from the Strait of Hormuz through the Panama Canal all the way to Santiago. So stay with me. We're gonna get there. I'm just gonna explain what happens all the way over in the Middle East and how it matters enormously to Chile. Let me start with, let me just minimize this really quickly. There we go. Let me start with 3 numbers. First, I mean, this is already dated. I did this yesterday. This is already dated. Oil prices are up 40% in 6 weeks. We're going to go with like, they're probably up more than 50% at this point. The White House treats $100 a barrel as the baseline, not the ceiling anymore. And 20% of the world's oil and gas passes through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. So those facts are going to sit at the base of everything that I'm talking about. I'm sure a lot of these you already know, but we're going to move on. Hopefully I'll cover some stuff that you don't already know. So here we go. At this point, we know that the price shock that we're feeling now, whether it's at the gas station or at the diesel station or even just like in flights, is a supply price shock. So supply has been disrupted and oil prices are going up. So like to compare that to 2008, prices went up because we had a demand shock. There was a lot of consumption and demand from China and from the emerging economies. This time we have a supply shock. The last time the world experienced a supply shock was in the Arab Spring of 2011. So I know you're probably thinking, oh, but what about Russia-Ukraine? During Russia-Ukraine, we never saw barrels go offline. There were 2 reasons why Russia-Ukraine caused a price shock. One was because there was the risk of a barrel going offline, which never happened. But there was also the fact that we were just emerging out of COVID and U.S. oil production was down about 30% from where it was before COVID, because oil prices went negative. So that move in oil production caused a price spike in 2022, but it wasn't because we had a supply disruption. I mean, maybe the US, if you want to call it that, but the real supply disruption that we've had prior to this was all the way back in 2011 during the Arab Spring. And oil prices during the Arab Spring averaged between 110 and 120 for about 4 years. Not quite 4 years, but about 4 years. So I'm not saying it's going to last that long this time, but I think we're in for a sustainable period of high prices, which we'll get to toward the end of this presentation. So it's been 15 years since we've experienced a price shock. If you didn't know it before the crisis, you certainly know it now that the Strait of Hormuz carries 17 to 19 million barrels of oil a day in refined products. The alternatives don't exist at scale. The Saudis have a pipeline that they can move some of their barrels to the Red Sea and export through the Suez Canal. But for the most part, there's no alternative. So when it comes to prices have risen 40%. That is just in the first wave. So before the crisis happened, a bunch of ships were exported out. The crisis happened. All of those ships are now landing and discharging. And that was the first price spike. Now, as there's no resupply following those ships, there will be an Act Two. And that Act Two will be a much larger move in prices than what we have seen over the last 5 weeks or whatever we have, because now there's no resupply. At the beginning, their ships were coming in, so there was some resupply. Now there's no resupply, so we have this gap now. That's starting to materialize. Gas is equally exposed, natural gas, which I'll come back to, but I'll flag now that Qatar, the world's largest LNG exporter, virtually all of its exports come through the Strait. That facility has been damaged, and the estimate will return online in a few years. So it's not that whereas like the Saudis can come back in a few weeks, Qatar natural gas won't be able to come back for a few years. So policymakers now have pulled all of the strings that they can pull. They've released the SPR, the US has lifted sanctions on Russian barrels and Iranian barrels. So right now, all of the supply levers have been pulled, which means the only lever left is the demand lever. So let's talk about Chile specifically. I'm sure you guys, most of you on this call know this. Most of your crude oil imports come from Ecuador and Brazil. So you receive crude oil, you refine that crude oil, and you make it into products, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and then you consume it as a country. So you consume those products, but you don't refine all of the products that you need. So you refine about 53% of your products. About the remainder 44% you import. And so you import those from the US Gulf Coast mainly. As you import those through the US Gulf Coast, they have to transit, of course, through the Panama Canal, and then they discharge. Chile joined the IEA in 2022. The IEA is a list of countries a group of countries that are supposed to hold 90 days of net imports in government reserves, so that if there is a crisis that happens, those net imports could be released. Unfortunately, Chile has not done that, and probably because this came really quickly and they still had like a few years before they could get to 90 days. I mean, it's only been 3 years since Chile joined the IEA. So the emergency SPR that is released through the IEA does not include Chile. It includes European countries. It includes the US. It includes Korea and Japan. And however, as the IEA countries release those reserves will stay inside of the country that releases them. So Germany is going to release a diesel SPR, and Germany will consume their own SPR. So SPRs are built, obviously, for the country that needs them, except for the US SPR. The US SPR is actually, we don't need it anymore. We're relatively insulated from the crisis that we have going on, because we produce and we refine and we export our oil. So we still send products out, which means that when we release the SPR, those barrels are going to find their way into the global market somehow. Now, I mentioned that a lot of your products come from the United States through the Panama Canal. However, you are exposed to another country, and that country is, oh no, South Korea. And here's the problem with being exposed to South Korea. South Korea is a major importer of Middle Eastern crude. So now you're going to start to see the knock-on impact of what happens when the Middle Eastern crude can't get to South Korea to refine the crude to turn it into product. So South Korea is a large consumer of Middle Eastern crude. They also consume the United States crude. They refine it and they export the products. Obviously, they consume some of the products, but they make more than they need. And so they export those products. As they get less and less crude oil, they can refine less and less, they can make less and less products, and therefore they're exporting less to the world, which means that if there is a squeeze from the US, for example, you will not be able to reach resupply from South Korea. So so South Korea is a major choke point for Chilean products. You will need to receive resupply if you can't get it from the United States. You'll need to receive resupply from somewhere else, or demand will have to be curtailed. And when I say that the only lever left is demand, that is the only lever left, which means that in an extreme scenario, I could expect to see countries, especially countries that are significantly exposed to Middle Eastern crude, I could expect to see countries start to see demand curtailments that look somewhat similar to COVID shutdowns. So we'll get to that in just a little bit. I don't want to stay here too long on South Korea. I just wanted to mention that it is certainly a risk that exists to Chile. And as you know, if a U.S. Gulf Coast refiner can export a barrel of diesel and get more money for it in Europe than Chile, then it will go to Europe. So now there's this fight between barrels. So it's kind of like musical chairs. There's a lot of people demanding a chair, and there's not enough chairs to go around. And so you're starting to see now the wealthier countries bid up the price because they need to receive it into their country. Okay, so now we're going to move on. Natural gas. Obviously, you don't have any exposure to natural gas. Chile doesn't have any exposure to natural gas through the Strait of Hormuz, but you do have exposure to the price of natural gas. So as the price rises, and it's just the same, as the price starts to rise, the exporter that you receive your gas from can choose to go somewhere else. So you receive over half of your imports from Trinidad and Tobago. I'm sure you guys know this, and the remainder from the United States. So if Rotterdam and the UK need natural gas and they can't get it from Qatar, which is where they would get their natural gas, then they'll call to the United States, hey, can you send us your natural gas? And the United States will send it there instead of Trinidad. So as the market starts to tighten, the countries that can bid higher for the product will bid higher for the product, and the country that can't will be left without the product, which means that the country that's left either needs to curtail demand or find another supplier. But again, like all the other suppliers are also going to go to the place that it offers them the highest price. So I am going to go to the last slide. Now, this slide is going to go through 3 different scenarios. There are probably hundreds of different scenarios that this could happen, but there are three scenarios that I'm going to give you. One is a base case. Like the question everybody's asking is like, when is the strait going to open? And you know what? If we knew when that was going to happen, we would make a lot of money, right? Because we would be able to trade the market really well. And last night, I think we heard the President Trump's speech, which gave us no new information, to be honest. And it did not sound de-escalatory, which means that it certainly sounded like this war was going to continue on for quite some time. There's a lot of rumors today that troops are going to be put on the ground inside Iran. So if we start to see that, this could be drug out for a significant amount of time. That is not our base case. Our base case is that we have de-escalation by April and May, and that the Hormuz Strait will open up by July, and that by the time we get to Q3 or Q4, oil prices will start to settle down because we'll be able to get all of that oil back onto the market. This is great for Chile, right? You'll experience high prices, but eventually those will start to soften, and you won't have any supply disruption, right? You'll be able to get your product, and you'll be able to get your crude, and there won't be any supply disruption. Now, no resolution through Q3, and there's this extended conflict. South Korea you won't receive anything from South Korea because they will basically close their border and only refine and keep what they need inside of the country, kind of like what China has done. You guys only have 31 days cover, which means that you have enough product to meet demand for 31 days, according to the IEA, by the way. This is just the numbers that Chile has reported to the IEA, so those are the numbers that I'm using. There's 31 days of product cover. It becomes really tight. And that product cover is 31 days as of, and that assumes you receive no imports, which by the way is not the case right now. You're currently receiving imports from the US. If your imports go to 0, you have 31 days left. And then you start to have like some feedstock issues, right? Refineries your refiners can process 300,000 barrels a day. You might not be able to receive the crude from Brazil or Ecuador. All right, the last one, and this is kind of the wild card, is that the conflict continues to spread and Hormuz's closed just indefinitely at this point. Oil prices will hit $150 a barrel. And you will really start to have to see curtailed demand. And when I say curtailed demand, and I mean the poor countries will always get hit first, right? We've already seen reports of like Bangladesh and Pakistan and Thailand and Indonesia, some of those countries that have, you know, they don't have any jet fuel, so they can't have any flights. They're running out of gasoline. And I have argued pretty adamantly that these countries that are running low on fuel would be better off setting a policy that curtails demand rationally than to run out of fuel. Because if you run out of fuel, you don't have fuel for emergency vehicles, you don't have fuel for electricity generation, you don't have fuel for hospitals that may need it. There will be a lot of things that you won't have fuel for, which could create chaos. And the last time we saw chaos because of a shortage of something was, again, the Arab Spring. So I think that it would be better for policymakers to have COVID-like shutdowns than to run out of fuel. So that is the kind of the wild card. I am going to toss out just one more wild card, then I will end it here, which is the biggest risk that Chile has is that the US has an export ban. I find it very unlikely. I've talked to the administration 100 times about what a bad idea that would be. It would obviously make the US a very unreliable supplier. It would also be very bad for like just the the oil and gas industry inside the United States. So I find it unlikely, but it is certainly something that exists, and it's certainly a possibility. Trump, we have over $4 a gallon gasoline. I'm sure you know this at this point, that gasoline is like the touchiest thing in America at this, in every single presidential election. There are hundreds of surveys that show presidential approval ratings and gasoline prices. And as gasoline goes up, approval ratings go down. So the midterm elections are coming up. It is not out of the question that the president would ban exports or curtail exports at some point, in which case then Chile is really exposed. So I'm going to end it there. I really look forward to your questions, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for this presentation. It's kind of overwhelming, and especially when we reach to the slide that you had the three cases, the three scenarios, and we pray that we don't get to the last one, where definitely a country like Chile will be really, really exposed, especially because we don't have those reserves, and we depend so much on other countries. So we will come back to you, Michelle, for questions and answers for sure. And now I'm going to give the floor to Michael, and you're already sharing your slides. Michael, thank you so much. There we are. You're mute.
Yeah. No, yes, it is better. So, buenos días a todos. Soy Michael McAdoo, basado en Montreal, Canadá. Voy a presentar en inglés, pero es un placer otra vez de estar con ustedes en la Fundación Chilena del Pacífico, un grupo muy importante, muy interesante, y tenemos una sociedad con la Fundación desde muchos años. Entonces, un placer. Puedo contestar a sus preguntas en inglés o en español, pero mis láminas son en inglés, entonces voy a cambiar para el idioma inglés. I just want to say thank you, Michelle, for that very good presentation. We have some complementary information that I think will build upon what you've had. If you look at history, I will say that usually wars are over in either days or years. If you look through history, not many wars are over in months. And as we look at this slider chart here, we're now into weeks. We will be in months. We could be in years. We had a similar chart for the Ukraine conflict, and we started in days, went to weeks, went to years. Geographic scope, of course, limited to Iran at the one end, could be global. Right now, we've got most of the Middle East and Gulf countries involved in this war. And if you count the Israeli-Iranian part of this and the Lebanese part of it, it's all over the Middle East, I would say, excluding Egypt, which is encouraging. And then just from a sectoral scope right now, we're obviously dealing with energy, transportation, and logistics. But we'll see this start to spread as the macroeconomic and some of the secondary microeconomic effects are felt. Just looking from a sectoral perspective, I think we've had an excellent report on oil and gas. I've got some complementary information, but shipping, of course, obviously very importantly impacted, and aviation, actually, not just 20% of world energy exports are dealing in the Strait of Hormuz, but also aviation from a cargo perspective. I've got a chart on that. And then metals, of course, also particularly aluminum being affected by this. So this disruption is starting to, let's say, proliferate across different sectors of the economy. Michelle mentioned demand and supply side. I think she's right about the supply side being, the demand side being so very important. But you can see here some of the measures that have been taken, the strategic oil reserves being released, some of the demand side things you're seeing, for example, in India, very significantly hit, particularly from a cooking gas perspective, but from others, China as well. Of course, China having a quicker path to renewables and non-hydrocarbon energy sources over many years, in a better position, relatively speaking, than India. But you can see here this kind of mix of supply and demand measures all over the world, as Michelle was mentioning. Let's take a cross-industry perspective. So this just shows sort of quantitatively how many tankers were crossing through Hormuz. You can see here, we're showing the Strait of Hormuz at the top, then the Panama Canal, other choke points around the world. But notice the light blue line, just how many of those tankers were going through the Strait of Hormuz. So it is very, very important, about 60 transits per week. And then you can just see here the downstream impact from a geographic perspective, where we're seeing the biggest impact. You see, of course, and this is trade overall, total imports disrupted, but obviously the GCC countries, Iran, Iraq, India, as I mentioned, China to a lesser extent, several countries in Africa, and then other parts of the world not yet affected in the same way. This, I think, Michelle well covered. It just shows the production, where it's coming from. There's the Strait of Hormuz, and you see both the from a liquid natural gas perspective and an oil perspective, just how much of the supply is being removed. And I want to repeat, this is not just a transportation issue. It's actually an upstream source of supply issue, as production facilities are bombed. And generally, they can't be coming back on stream in days or weeks. It's months and more likely years in many of these cases. Michelle mentioned how much more important this is than previous conflicts. This is a chart that goes back to 1973. And just to explain the chart, the light green is 30 days after the start of the event, then 60 days, then 90 days. And then you see the percentage change in prices. So already we are worse than any of the previous events, except the Arab oil embargo of 1973. And you'll notice here on the right, the scale of disruption in terms of millions of barrels per day, that's the bottom part of the chart, much greater. And the only reason it's not 20 million barrels per day, which would be about 20%, is because of that supply coming on. That won't last forever. And that's what my next chart shows. Michelle mentioned this, but if you look at that normal transit level, about 20 million barrels a day, you can see these International Energy Agency stock releases have gotten us back up close to that level, but they won't last forever. The baseline is there. You can see the Saudis able to divert that. That's the light mauve color that's there. But as this moves into many months, it'll be very, very hard to replace that supply. So it is going to be a question of demand. So I'll leave that at this, but this just reinforces the point that Michelle was making. If I look at aerospace, I did spend many years at Bombardier, so it's a sector that's dear to my heart. You can look on the left-hand side just how important were those airports from a traffic perspective. So you see Dubai, Doha, Jeddah, RUH is Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Tel Aviv. Very important. Pardon me. Oops. Sorry. But look on the right-hand side, just how much air traffic we've seen go. And if you look at a place like Qatar Airways, such an important airline in the region, Doha being the second largest hub in the region, 90% drop in flights, 80% for Fly Dubai, 65% for that. Emirates slightly better in Saudi just because they're a little bit farther away from the conflict, but a very significant drop. And then if you just look at the airport status on the lower left side, a lot of those aircrafts, except for Jeddah and Riyadh, under partial closure, and then the airspace status, of course, going on with that. And then from an air cargo perspective, about 20% of the cargo was going there, particularly looking at Africa, Middle East, Africa to Europe, significant amounts of the volume there, a little less to APEC, but basically super important. And you see those large cargo carrying airlines, particularly Qatar and Emirates, very much in a curtailed capacity situation. Moving on to aluminum, you'll see here just the production in kilotons, and a number of these aluminum smelters, if you will, are being hit by this. And you'll notice, in particular, Bahrain, you see UAE there with some large production numbers. These facilities are quite vulnerable, and some have been hit. But the Middle East is about 8% of the global supply, 23% if we exclude China. And a lot of Chinese aluminum is not getting into global markets because of anti-dumping measures and anti-subsidy measures on Chinese aluminum. So that 8% of the global is actually a bigger portion when you remove the Chinese supply and demand. So big impact on aluminum as well. Now, what are companies doing? I know there's many private sector participants on the call. This is just looking at a typical company financial statement. So the profit and loss, you see there higher inflation potentially affecting the consumption levels, hitting the revenue, the supply disruption and higher costs hitting your cost of goods sold, risk and security and contingency costs, risk premium and the financing. So all that affecting the profit and loss. And then on the balance sheet, you see effects on receivables, inventory, accounts payable, credit conditions, potentially lower consumption levels in PP&E, and of course market uncertainty potentially affecting multiples for these companies. So a lot of these are direct impacts, a lot of these are indirect impacts, but there's no question that this will take a lot of time to work through, and every company needs to look at its situation, which is why we say clients should look at the direct implications and also those indirect ones. Definitely work on scenarios. I think Michelle provided 3 helpful scenarios there. How to stabilize your business, what are your capabilities to deal with this? And then longer term, if we are in a world of $150 to $200 barrel oil for years as these supply sources are offline, what can we do in terms of strategy, operating model, and reconfiguring supply chains? So with that, I'll turn it over to the next presenter, Matías. Looking forward to having the conversation with you after. Muchas gracias a todos y estoy esperando sus preguntas. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Michael. Bueno, a la presentación de Michelle has agregado otros elementos adicionales para preocuparnos, ¿no? El tema del aluminio, del transporte aéreo, el transporte no solo de pasajeros, sino de carga, el tema de, bueno, cómo esto, si se prolonga, las consecuencias que va a tener directa en los negocios, ¿no? Así que vamos a volver contigo, Michael, en un momento, después de la presentación de Matías.
Vamos a compartir las láminas, no se preocupen, vamos a compartir las láminas.
Sí, como siempre, vamos a compartir el video de este webinar y las láminas de cada una de las presentaciones, que tienen además material súper interesante para analizar en detalle. Hay muchas cifras. Lo más preocupante son los distintos escenarios y los distintos precios a los cuales pueden llegar los barriles de petróleo, que es lo que tiene más impacto al final. Matías, tienes la palabra y puedes compartir tus láminas.
Muy buenos días, muchas gracias. Luis Alberto me parece que las va a compartir. Antes de partir, no estoy en Santiago en este momento, y ayer pregunté cómo era el internet acá y me dijeron que era muy bueno, hasta que no lo era, y ya se ha caído 4 veces, así que bear with me, si es que llega a pasar algo, espero que no pase, pero estoy ahí tratando de reconectarme lo más probable. Bueno, me invitaron, ahí está compartiendo. Bueno, mientras tanto, solamente aclarar que me invitaron un poco para hablar sobre el impacto de la guerra de Irán en Chile, para lo cual no solamente me voy a referir al impacto económico, que obviamente es el más tangible, el más inmediato, sino que también me voy a referir al impacto político. Pero además de los impactos, quiero agregar 2 ideas adicionales. O sea, la primera, que aunque Chile será fuertemente impactado en el corto plazo por su dependencia de los combustibles fósiles, este mismo shock puede aumentar el valor estratégico de Chile en el largo plazo. Y la segunda es que esta guerra, que aunque y cómo se ha desencadenado, no era totalmente impredecible, y con ello se podrían haber tomado ciertas medidas de mitigación acorde. No sé si está ahí puesto, hay que ponerlo en full screen, porfa, Luis Alberto. Si es que se puede. Exacto, vamos a la lámina 2. Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, el primer impacto, que es el más inmediato y más intangible, que es el impacto económico, Chile, ya se ha dicho, depende fuertemente de los combustibles importados. El 98% de los combustibles fósiles que usamos en Chile son importados y por eso cuando sube el precio internacional del petróleo nos impacta de forma muy, muy, muy fuerte y de una forma muy directa. Ejemplo, ya sabemos que el Pratt subió más de 60% desde enero, llegando a 112 y ahora comentaron que ha seguido aumentando. Eso significa que la gasolina 93, que es la más barata en Chile, subió en Santiago alrededor de 370 pesos por litro, lo que significa en la práctica para una familia que cada vez que vamos a la estación de servicio son $20 más por el llenado del auto. Y el diésel subió alrededor de 580 pesos por litro, que es un aumento del 62%. Ahora, esa es la primera línea de impacto de precios. En una segunda línea de impacto, y obviamente explicado principalmente por el aumento del diésel, ya que alrededor del 62% de todo el transporte de carga en Chile es terrestre y ocupa diésel, está el aumento del flete. El aumento del flete terrestre, alrededor del 15%, se espera que los pasajes interurbanos puedan subir alrededor del 45%. Este aumento obviamente se traspasa al precio de los productos de consumo de primera necesidad, como son las verduras, la harina, el pescado, la leche, etc. Y hay un tercer nivel que pocas veces se menciona, que son los fertilizantes. O sea, 40% de la oferta global de fertilizantes pasa por el estrecho de Hormuz. Con el estrecho de Hormuz bloqueado, los precios de fertilizantes van a subir alrededor del 50%, y esto va a llegar a Chile con cierto atraso, pero va a llegar y esto lo van a pagar los agricultores y con ello los consumidores. Y eso ya lo dijo el Banco Central de Chile, que en su IPOM de marzo dijo que la guerra va a sumar 1,6 puntos porcentuales de inflación por sí sola. Si lo ponemos en perspectiva, esto es más que el shock del aumento del precio de la electricidad completa del año 2024. Y se proyecta ya que la inflación para este año, que era del 3,2%, va a subir al 4% y se posterga la meta que teníamos del 3% para el 2027. Entonces en Chile, obviamente el shock de precios es muy rápido y se traspasa con fuerza al resto de la economía. Siguiente, por favor. Una slide más, por favor. Gracias. Ahora, ¿de qué otra manera impacta a la economía? Porque obviamente la inflación es el canal más visible, pero no es el único. Al menos para mí hay 5 canales por los cuales esta guerra impacta económicamente a Chile. Primero, la inflación, ya lo mencionamos. Segundo, la presión fiscal, que son las medidas de mitigación para algunos consumidores, y nos vamos a referir al MEP en un momento más. El tercero, menor crecimiento. El PIB ya se revisó a la baja de un 2 a 3% como era proyectado, ahora del 1,5 al 2,5%. El consumo ya bajó de un 2,5 a un 2,2%. O sea, la recuperación económica cuando estaba despegando se frena justo cuando estaba tomando cierto grado de dinamismo. Cuarto, restricción monetaria. Banco Central tenía previsto bajar la tasa de interés, pero la guerra en Irán obviamente obligaría a pausarlo en 4,5%. ¿Esto qué significa? Créditos hipotecarios más caros, créditos de consumo más caros y una cosa que para nosotros es bastante importante, el costo de la inversión será más alto. Y quinto, la indexación. En Chile el shock inflacionario se propaga a través de la UEF, que se ajusta mensualmente al índice del precio del consumidor, afectando arriendo, las hipotecas, los dividendos, a través de la UTM, que es otro índice indexado al IPC, aumenta las multas, los impuestos, las tarifas reguladas de ciertos sectores, incluso a través de ciertos contratos colectivos, la minería especialmente, que se reajustan los salarios en relación al IPC pasado. Y es por eso que nuestro Banco Central lo llama la segunda vuelta inflacionaria. Y es uno de los factores que hace que Chile sienta este tipo de crisis con más persistencia que otras economías. Siguiente, por favor. Ahora, voy a esperar un segundo, pero ahora vamos a hablar un poco de otro impacto, que es el impacto político de la guerra en en Irán, en Chile. No quiero detenerme demasiado en la coyuntura política, pero sí creo que hay datos y una elección que son muy, muy relevantes. Primero, el gobierno decidió no implementar el MEPCO. Para las personas fuera de Chile, esto es un mecanismo de estabilización de precios de los combustibles. Y traspasó, y decidió pasar el traspaso de las alzas de precios internacionales del petróleo directamente a los consumidores. Para el gobierno, ¿por qué lo hizo? Era un shock de precio fiscalmente demasiado alto para ellos. Ellos estimaban que alrededor de, si utilizaban este mecanismo, iba a impactar las arcas fiscales en alrededor de 140 millones de dólares por semana, por lo que decidió no implementarlo y hacer medidas de mitigación muy específicas, con bonos muy específicos a ciertos sectores de la población. Y esa decisión de no utilizar este mecanismo generó la primera crisis política de la administración y una muy fuerte baja en las encuestas. A modo de ejemplo, en la encuesta de Pulso Ciudadana, medida justo después del anuncio, la aprobación del presidente Kast cayó 13 puntos en 2 semanas. Su desaprobación se disparó, o sea, del 26 al 48%. Según Cadena y Criteria, acumula una caída de 14 puntos y por primera vez en su mandato, o sea, esto partió recién, la desaprobación supera la aprobación. Y el rechazo ciudadano a la decisión específica fue súper claro, o sea, 57% de los encuestados declaró estar en desacuerdo con no activar el MEPCO y solamente un 21% la apoyó. Según los especialistas, aquí se acabó la luna de miel porque tenemos que recordar, de nuevo para nuestra audiencia extranjera, que el gobierno del presidente Kast partió recién el 11 de marzo de este año. Esto importa, ¿por qué? Porque demuestra que una crisis geopolítica externa, y aquí voy a agregar, que no estamos midiendo ni analizando apropiadamente, puede traducirse en una crisis política en cuestión de días. Esto puede impactar la agenda, obviamente, del resto del gobierno, porque un gobierno con muy baja aprobación le cuesta mucho aprobar materias en el Congreso. Siguiente, por favor. Ahora veamos un poco el mediano y largo plazo, porque en el fondo estamos todos de acuerdo en el impacto. Las 2 presentaciones anteriores me dejaron con colon irritable, pero sabemos ya un poco que los mercados bursátiles han sido fuertemente impactados. Ahora, queda la duda si esto puede ser aún peor. Los escenarios de las presentaciones anteriores, al parecer, irían en esa tendencia. Sin embargo, hay ciertas acciones en esta vorágine y en esta locura que está pasando que han subido. Y como pueden ver, las acciones del sector renovable chino se desacoplaron del mercado y subieron. Ejemplo de ello, GCL, que es el mayor productor celular de China, subió un 48% este mes. BYD, que todos lo conocen, el mayor fabricante de autos eléctricos del mundo, subió un 12%. El mayor fabricante de baterías del mundo subió entre un 15 y un 20%. Sungrow, especialista en almacenamiento solar, un 19%. O sea, han sumado alrededor de 70 billones en capitalización de mercado desde que inició esta guerra. Y todo esto mientras, y pues puse el índice, mientras los mercados globales, lo voy a poner incluso en China, Shanghai bajó un 8%. Siguiente, por favor. Pero ¿por qué está pasando esto? Y aquí está un poco el giro estratégico, y es que es uno de los puntos centrales de la presentación. Porque el mercado está apostando que el mundo acelere la búsqueda de seguridad energética, de soberanía energética. No sé si yo estoy lento, no se ve la slide, por favor. La siguiente. Y eso, muchas gracias. Entonces, retomando, es porque el mundo está apostando a que se acelere la búsqueda de la soberanía energética, de la seguridad energética. ¿Y cómo van a lograr esto? O sea, no va a ser con stockpile, sino por medio de energía renovable, y aquí agregaría incluso nuclear. Y acá es muy relevante lo que dijo hace 2 días el presidente de Corea, el presidente Lee, en el sentido de que la situación es tan seria que deben transitar a energías renovables de forma acelerada. Esto lo dijo en una entrevista que hizo en un medio de comunicación. Y dijo que si seguimos dependiendo de energías fósiles, nuestro futuro será muy riesgoso. Anteriormente, Para muchos, el argumento a favor de las energías renovables, la electrificación, el almacenamiento, estaba asociado principalmente por razones de cambio climático, ESG, que es un argumento legítimo, que dio apoyo, pero se fue politizando en el tiempo. Y ahora este mismo debate está adquiriendo otra dimensión de seguridad económica, autonomía estratégica, soberanía, resiliencia. Y con ello queda claro que tanto los mercados como la agenda política están dando señales de que el mundo va a necesitar más renovables y más almacenamiento. Y esa premisa nos lleva directamente a la siguiente pregunta. ¿Quién produce los insumos que la hacen posible? Siguiente, por favor. Y aquí está la oportunidad para Chile. Y aquí entra Chile. Porque Chile obviamente no exporta petróleo, pero sí exporta varios de los insumos que hacen posible una economía menos dependiente del petróleo. Más electrificación significa más cobre para cables, motores, transformadores, infraestructura de red. Chile tiene alrededor del 27% de las reservas de cobre del mundo. Banco Central proyecta un precio de $4,5 de libra para el 2026, o sea, un récord histórico, y yo soy de la opinión que tal vez a la luz de los antecedentes se podrían incluso reevaluar al alza este precio. Más almacenamiento y electromovilidad significa más litio. Chile tiene el 42% de las reservas de litio del mundo. Y el más énfasis en seguridad energética aumenta el valor de las cadenas de suministro. Estas cadenas de suministro que tienen que ser estables, de países confiables, para proveer a la minería y obviamente a la energía limpia, y aquí Chile obviamente tiene una ventaja comparativa. Entonces, la guerra en Irán generó una urgencia estratégica para la independencia energética y eso es una oportunidad de largo plazo para Chile. Siguiente, por favor. Ahora, entonces, ¿cómo veo el outlook para Chile en tres horizontes? Obviamente uno en el corto plazo bastante negativo, inflación, presión fiscal, menor holgura monetaria, más incertidumbre, mayor sensibilidad política. Mediano plazo, mixto, mercado energético muy volátil, pero al mismo tiempo se fortalece la lógica de la diversificación, la electrificación, seguridad energética y el cobre por sobre los $4,5 la libra, inversiones mineras avanzando, siguen adelante con una muestra de que el mercado va hacia allá y a largo plazo obviamente ahí está la lógica de la oportunidad, el mundo valora mucho más la autonomía energética, aumenta la necesidad de minerales críticos y entonces Chile queda mejor posicionado de lo que estaba antes, incluso teniendo presente con costos de la inversión muchísimo más altos. Ahora, para aprovechar esta oportunidad, y lo voy a aquí linkear con una presentación que hizo la Fundación Chilena del Pacífico hace un par de días, debemos ser activos en la atracción de inversión, tener mucho cuidado cómo se implementen medidas como el investment screening, el control de exportación, la seguritización de la infraestructura crítica. O sea, no podemos discriminar arbitrariamente, sino obviamente otros países se verán más beneficiados de esta oportunidad. Siguiente, por favor. Siguiente slide, por favor. Y porque aquí me quiero referir a otro punto que yo encuentro muy relevante en la presentación, pero va a ser por el tiempo en forma muy breve, porque se ha discutido mucho en Chile que esta guerra en Irán era un hecho completamente impredecible y como tal no había forma de anticiparse ni tomar medidas ni nada al respecto. Pero yo discuto, ¿es verdad que esto era completamente impredecible? Bueno, yo soy de la opinión que ningún gobierno, banco central, directorio de empresa global puede decir que esto era completamente imprevisto, ya que actores ya venían trabajando en escenarios de escalada del Medio Oriente, de interrupción del estrecho de Hormuz, de shock energéticos con efectos que estamos viendo no por semanas, no por meses, sino por años. Y muy específico desde junio del 2025. Ejemplos concretos lo pueden ver ahí en el slide, Eurasia Group, reporte de Political Risk del 2024, un año antes de guerra, pero ya para la gente que no cree mucho en las consultoras, tenemos el Banco de la Reserva Federal de Dallas, acá 6 meses antes, o sea, en agosto del 2025, paper con escenarios de escalada de la guerra de Israel con Irán, uno de los escenarios exactamente con lo que está pasando, con el precio exactamente de un poco de lo que estamos viendo, y era literalmente describía lo que estaba ocurriendo. Entonces, la información existía, Lo que falta es que nuestras instituciones, que los gobiernos, las empresas incorporen este tipo de riesgo en sus marcos de decisión. O sea, por ejemplo, si yo pongo la medida tomada hacia el mercado, ¿tiene sentido si en tu marco de análisis se establece que el conflicto va a durar solamente un par de semanas, como lo dice el presidente Trump? Yo creo que no. Si dura mucho, tal vez sí. Entonces, una guerra que dure con años, o sea, ¿cuál va a ser nuestra alternativa, nuestro plan de acción? Son todas esas cosas que si ya se tienen que empezar a incorporar de forma mucho más preponderante la toma de decisión de Hacienda, del Banco Central y obviamente del sector privado. Y con esto cierro la última lámina, por favor. Me gustaría que se quede con tres cosas. O sea, que esta crisis no fue completamente imprevisible. O sea, había señales, escenarios posibles. Segundo, que la geopolítica ya no es algo que le pasa a otros. O sea, entra directamente en nuestra inflación, en nuestro crecimiento, en nuestra política fiscal y, ojo, en nuestra legitimidad política. Lo que pasó a Chile, obviamente, creo que es una demostración súper concreta de ello. Y tercero, que Chile tiene activos que pueden volverse más valiosos en un mundo que ahora mira con más urgencia la seguridad energética. Esto es un cambio de switch que puede verse reflejado en las decisiones de inversión, obviamente en mediano y largo plazo. Y como decía el expresidente Piñera, o sea, Chile es un país muy pobre en energía renovable, pero somos inmensamente ricos ocupando su tono en energía del futuro. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Matías. Qué buena presentación has dado un, nos ha inspirado para pensar en términos más positivos luego que partimos con la presentación de Michelle, con esos tres escenarios que nos llevaban camino al precipicio, pero tú nos has planteado la oportunidad que tiene Chile como país en proveer la materia prima para estos recursos renovables, específicamente el litio, todo lo que venga de la energía solar, de viento, en fin, ojalá el hidrógeno verde, que todavía estamos ahí viendo si se invierte o no se invierte, que bueno, en fin, yo creo que esto es una tremenda oportunidad. Muchas gracias por ese punto de vista. Tenemos varias preguntas. Voy a partir con algunas de las que están aquí en el chat que me parecen interesantes para... son participantes más especializados y vamos a aprovechar que tenemos esta tremendo panel para contestarlo. Voy a partir por William Phillips. Dice, ¿cómo se explica que el valor de la gasolina por galón está sobre los $4 en Estados Unidos si ayer el presidente Trump comentaba que era autosuficiente en petróleo, con lo cual no necesita el que viene de Irán? Maybe this is a question for Michelle.
I think that question's for me, yes?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so yes, that's such a great question. So the gasoline is a global product, so it's traded everywhere. If the US became isolationist, which by the way should be one of your biggest fears from the near term. Matías, your presentation was so great on renewables. It's something I've certainly been thinking about. But because the US is exposed to the global price, we have to pay, and gasoline there's a shortage of gasoline, our prices also rise. So the US is so large and it's broken up into a lot of different districts. All of our refining lives in the US Gulf Coast. And I mean, not all of it, but a majority of it lives in the US Gulf Coast. And so we send all of our oil there. It gets refined and then it either disperses back through the United States or it exports out. Now, because a lot of demand for gasoline lives in California on the West Coast, and then also on the East Coast in New York, Boston, Philly, DC. On the East Coast, there's not enough pipeline capacity that goes from the Gulf Coast to the coastal property, the East and West Coast. And so both of those regions have to import gasoline. So it's mandatory to import gasoline because we have a rule in the United States, which I think Michael had in one of his presentations called the Jones Act, which means you can't go from one US port to another US port unless the ship was made in the US, has a US flag, and has US crew members. And because of the Jones Act, it means that those coastal prices are exposed significantly to the global prices. So those raise the price of gasoline significantly higher than, say, if you're in like the middle of the United States, like Nebraska. So I hope that answers the question as to why we are also exposed to gasoline prices, certainly not as exposed to countries that are only importers, but we are exposed to gasoline prices as well.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that explanation. And there's another question from Alan Brown. I'm going to say it in Spanish, so the interpreter translated better than me. It says, dice, si se puede comentar si la coyuntura puede gatillar inversión en combustibles y feedstocks sustentables, como amoníaco verde o e-fuels, o tal vez algo sobre costos, si estamos cerca de paridad, etcétera, con precios de crudo sobre los $100 el barril.
Is that also for me?
I think so.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I'll take it. I'm gonna give you an analogy of something that happened, or a frame of reference. So remember, I talked about the Arab Spring and how oil prices were between $100 and $120 for 4 years. During those 4 years, do you know what happened? The United States found shale. I mean, it kind of had already existed, but it became more efficient. And because oil prices were high for so long, it generated this new investment in this new supply of oil. So high prices are always the cure for high prices. So as high prices happen, you know what else happened also between 2011 and 2014 was really the renewable transition. I mean, I always hate to call it renewable, but I'm going to call it the alternative energy transition, because we started to see a significant amount of investment in solar and batteries and wind. And because energy prices are high, it creates this new investment. So I suspect that high prices will also generate a new investment in things that we haven't even really been able to like get off the ground, like green hydrogen. I mean, it's been around for so long and it's never really taken off. And ammonia, maybe we'll see that take off. So I think that there are going to be a lot of winners in having high prices. And honestly, I don't know what it's going to look like, but high prices create solutions, and those solutions are going to could be a whole number of things, including EVs and solar and wind and hydrogen.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And we hope from Chile that the green hydrogen becomes something that it's worth it to invest, because potentially we have so much to develop in that area, and we haven't done so because of what you're saying, no? The high costs, everything, but maybe now it will be worth it to explore that possibility further. Matías, por favor, y also Michael, if you want to comment or complement whatever is please go ahead. Matías.
No, I do have a question, in fact. So, but after everyone, so
no, go ahead, please. Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is for Michelle and Michael, because I've seen this type of scenarios and the probability of them, but I imagine also a world with a 4 option, with a sort of less like a kinetic equilibrium, if may I call it like that, where it's a prolonged war, but there's like a, I don't know, agreement between parties that you do not, I don't know, you don't impact like the supply of oil. You do not impact the transit of the Strait of Hormuz. So you continue in this war, but with this type of logic, like sort of less the 8 year of war that we had between Iran and Iraq. So that means prices between, I don't know, 100, 120, but with high volatility, but that can, I don't know, make the world continue running in some way. I don't know if you see that as a real option. That for me is the highest option. This is not of interest of Iran, neither of closing the Strait of Hormuz, but it's not of the interest of the US for sure. I don't know how you see that option as well.
Can I jump in really quickly? And then Michael, I'd be so curious to see what you think. Iran has one card, which is the Strait of Hormuz. And so if they give up that one card, they really don't have any leverage. I mean, they also can bomb oil facilities, but Iran's goal is to inflict as much pain as possible on the United States so that the United States will leave. And the pain that the United States is caused is economic pain, right? They certainly can't hit us in the United States, although they could do some sort of terrorist activity here, but they can't hit us in the United States. They're trying to hit US military bases or US companies inside of the Middle East, but they haven't really been successful at that. So really their only leverage that they have in this war is the Strait of Hormuz. So if they give up their leverage, they lose the war. And so I think that their only leverage is oil and oil prices, whereas like the Iran-Iraq war, when they were fighting back and forth, that's not going to be any leverage that they have. So I think Iran giving up that leverage and saying, okay, well, we'll continue to have this war. We just won't hit any of our neighbors or close the strait. I mean, they don't have anything else that they can do. They basically would be giving up the war. I think there was this really great article in Foreign Affairs called Iran's Long Game. It's an excellent article if anyone if you have access or if you can get a hold of it. And in that article, they talk about how one of Iran's goals is to show their neighbors that the U.S. is not a reliable ally. So the U.S. said that they're going to defend you. We're showing you that they're not going to defend you, right? I think that it was seen initially when Abqaiq was hit, the Saudi oil facility in 2019, it was hit and the U.S. didn't do anything to defend the Saudis. This is just another way to show like the Saudis, the Emiratis, even the Qataris, that the U.S. is not a reliable ally and that the U.S. needs to leave the region. And so I think that Iran's long game, so if you get a hold of that article, Iran's long game certainly isn't achieved by saying we'll stay away from energy facilities because that's the only leverage they have.
Thank you so much.
I think Michelle said it well. I think I would just say that, Matías, I think the difference between the analogy you mentioned is each party in the Iran and Iraq had a similar set of interests in that outcome. And I think there's a very different interest in this outcome, which Michelle just articulated. So, and I'm still getting the Physical Economist magazine, and the cover this week is this giant choking by Iran, and the cover says "Advantage Iran," and I think it's exactly for this reason, right? So, I agree. I can't see that. In fact, I appreciated your comment on the energy transition because I'm very much in the world of those who are disappointed that we've walked away from all of these decarbonization commitments, be it governments, be it corporations. I was 7 years on the board of the Nature Conservancy, so I'm actually longer term encouraged that people will finally realize that for many good reasons, hydrocarbons are not the best way to fund our life. But I think for now, we're stuck in the situation we are.
Yeah, and I take the opportunity, Michael, and also Michelle, if you agree with Matías in the sense that this could be a good opportunity for Chile in terms of the resources that we have. It's something that we should look forward. We should take it easy, wait for a while. How do you see it? I know that the scenarios are very complicated to say this is going to happen, but what are your views on this?
Después de morir, vas al cielo. Sí, por supuesto.
Well, I think it's a great. I think it's a great opportunity for Chile. I don't think the problem, and Michael, that we have seen the move away from renewables or alternative energy sources is because oil prices, because of shale, right? That's the reason why we've seen this. So the best cure for high prices are high prices, and the best cure for low prices are low prices. And because we've had low prices, if you don't have a super strong economy, then you need to use the lowest fuel source that you can find. And for the last decade, that has been oil and gas. I expect that a couple things are going to happen after this war is over. One, energy security is going to be, everyone's going to have the tagline, energy security is national security, right? So everybody's going to be focused on energy security, whatever that looks like. China has been focused on energy security for the last, I don't know, at least 10 years. And they have been developing, I mean, listen, they use a tremendous amount of coal. So it's not like they're developing renewables or alternative energy sources because they're green. They're just doing it because it's a good way to make sure that they have energy security. I think that is a huge opportunity for Chile to invest in these alternative energy. We are going to have high prices for a very long time because everybody is going to be building strategic reserves. All of the strategic reserves that are being released are going to need to be refilled. And in addition to that, all of the facilities that have been damaged in the Middle East still need to be fixed. So I expect that we, at least for the next couple of years, will see high prices, which I think you should never waste a crisis. And this is certainly a crisis that Chile should not waste and should really go in. And if your asset is something connected to alternative energy sources, I think it's a huge opportunity.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That's a very positive note coming out of this webinar. Michelle, there's a question. What about nuclear energy? Because we're talking about renewables, etc. Could this situation result in a revival? In Southeast Asia, some countries are looking at small modular reactors with big interest. This is a question from a Chilean diplomat, Tamara Villanueva.
Yeah, it's such a great question. Nuclear has been back. I mean, I have been in energy for so long. I remember when nuclear was very uncool, and now it's back like in the cool section. So everybody loves nuclear energy now. It certainly has been helpful for France, right? They didn't shut down their nuclear facilities, and now France doesn't have a problem, but Germany has a problem, right? So we're starting to see nuclear energy emerge as clean energy, or moving away from fossil fuels is popular. Nuclear energy is very expensive still. So building it takes a long time. It is expensive. It is very cheap. The Chinese have made it very cheap to put a solar panel on your roof, or to put a wind turbine in your windiest fields, right? So I think nuclear energy will emerge as a winner in this crisis. I just don't think it's going to be the biggest winner, just because the lead time to get nuclear up and running is going to take a lot longer than, say, solar or wind, or one of the other alternatives that are gonna emerge from this. But it's certainly not a loser. How about that?
Thank you so much, Michelle.
Maybe just a compliment. When I saw the question from Tamara Villanueva, I thought about France, and the other thing that France said from a defense perspective was, you can't count on the Anglo-Saxons to defend you. You need to have your independent nuclear force. And for all those years, they were part of NATO, but not in the integrated command. They did their own energy, and they're looking pretty smart in retrospective. So de Gaulle, I think, maybe had some insight that some of us were lacking.
Y voy a sumar la respuesta del sector privado. La industria del data center de AI ya hace 2 años ha dado señales de que necesita mucha energía, y que esa energía, sobre todo en Estados Unidos, solamente la podrían tener con centrales small nuclear facilities. Entonces ellos también lo están viendo de esa forma, porque es estable, es clean, que va en línea con las metas que tiene Microsoft, Meta, Google, etcétera. Entonces podría ser, pero es cara. Pero en este momento la industria del data center está en condiciones económicas de soportarlo.
Muchas gracias, Matías. Hay otra pregunta de uno de nuestros asiduos participantes, dice, de Agustín Marín, dice, what impacts and threats do you see in the short, mid, and long term for agribusiness? We talk about the fertilizers. Well, Matías touched on that, but what do you foresee in this ground, in this industry?
I'm going with that's me again.
If you want, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think Matías covered it, or it might have been Michael. I can't remember on which one of the slides. It talked about the significant amount of fertilizer that transits through the strait. I have done like a little bit of research on this on fertilizer. I have some more information coming on it over the next few days. But in general, the knock-on impact from fertilizer, if crops can't get their fertilizer for planting season and for harvest, then the amount of crop yields that's going to come out of it is going to be significantly lower, or they're not going to be able to do certain crops because they don't have the fertilizer for it. It's definitely a crisis. I did this thing called the war endurance model, which basically was how long every country or region will be able to last for the Strait of Hormuz, like how long it's closed. If you're interested in it, just reach out to me. And I can send you some of my notes, but I did one on fertilizer. And what I found was the most exposed country to fertilizer and the war that we're currently having is Egypt. And the reason for that is because Egypt gets its natural gas from Israel, and they import a significant amount of food, and they also have like a fiscal crisis. So all of those reasons made Egypt the most exposed. And I hate to bring this up again, but when we have a crisis like that, we start to see Arab Spring-like conflicts. And I can't help but think that if Egypt doesn't get the supplies that it's going to need, then its people will uprise, and we will see another Arab Spring emerge in those North African countries again. So fertilizer is certainly a crisis, and it's going to turn into a humanitarian crisis if it's not addressed relatively soon.
Wow, those are not good news.
So that's the short term. I didn't go into the long term, but I'm not sure I have a view on the long term, but that's the short term of it. Yeah.
And in the long term, Michelle, maybe you have better news on that.
I wish I in the long term, like I said, the best cure for high prices are high prices. Somebody else will come up with a new agriculture fertilizer business, and it won't be connected to the Middle East, right? Like this crisis is going to change global flows. It's going to change global alignments. Like the entire world order is being rewritten every single day that this war goes on. And so it's certainly something that when we look back after all of this has happened, we're going to see how the world order changed in a way that we couldn't have possibly anticipated. But when it comes to crops and commodities in general, high prices generate a tremendous amount of opportunity for new innovation and new industries to emerge.
Yeah.
Maybe I would just add, I think the other factor we're seeing in some of the food is just the transportation cost as the prices, if fuel price stays so high. If you've got a certain food that has to transit a great distance and transportation is a big percentage of the actual food itself cost, there'll be an impact there as well from a price perspective.
Thank you very much, Michael. Hay otra pregunta acá de Milenkos Kognich, un embajador de Chile, que fue embajador de Chile ante Naciones Unidas. Dice, gracias por las 3 excelentes presentaciones. Y esta es me pregunta para Michelle y Michael. ¿Cuánto pueden influir las mid-elections de noviembre en Estados Unidos para que se adopten decisiones en la administración de Trump y que no se prolongue al Q3, al tercer trimestre, esta guerra?
I'm from Canada.
Oh, you're from Canada. Okay.
Well, you may go ahead easily, more freely to say whatever you think, Michael. Maybe, I don't know. No, but both of you, I don't know what you think on that. Just a perception.
Well, I'll invite Michelle. I think she showed the graph of presidential approval and gasoline prices. I think that's a key thing. Michelle?
I think, yeah. Thank you, Michael. Sorry, you sound American, so you need to like twang your O's a little bit so that people know that you're Canadian. I as an American, and also I always try to give this disclaimer. I live in New York, so my view is obviously tilted a little bit toward the liberal side. So take that with a pinch of salt as I give you my I try very hard to give you an unbiased opinion. The midterm elections are coming up. Currently, all of Congress is controlled by the Republicans, which is the party that Trump is in. Republicans have a very broad spectrum at this point, where it used to be relatively narrow and you could identify a Republican. Now you have like MAGA Republicans, which are extreme, and then you have a relatively moderate Republican. And so those people span inside of Congress. So it's not all of MAGA that's inside of Congress at the moment. But as the midterms come up, even if Congress doesn't flip to Democrat, which I suspect it will, we'll see seats in the House and seats in the Senate change from Republican to Democrat. But even if it doesn't, I think we'll see more moderate Republicans. And if we see more moderate Republicans, you could see an impeachment. You could see a demanding to end the war. In order to start a war, you're supposed to go to Congress and get permission. Obviously, that didn't happen this time. And he's attempted to not call it a war, although has said war many times. But he has attempted to not call it a war and to call it a conflict. I'm relatively confident that if someone bombed Chile like that, or if someone bombed the United States like that, we would declare it a war. So it looks like a war. It smells like a war. Pretty sure Congress also sees it as a war. So a move from a controlled Congress of Republicans to a controlled Congress of Democrats will start to tilt the U.S. in a way that will start to constrain Trump's policy agendas, which probably mean less tariffs. Trump has been able to go around Congress in many areas. I'm not sure that this will prevent him from going around Congress. I think he'll continue to try to do that for as long as he possibly can. But yeah, the midterms, I think people are hopeful for the midterms that it will rein Trump in. I'm not as hopeful, because I think Trump has done an excellent job of going around all of the rules without having any consequences to them. I can tell you also that while Trump does not abide by any of the international rules, bombing infrastructure such as power plants is a war crime. And his latest post that says that he is going to bomb power infrastructure in all of Iran would be viewed by the international community as a war crime. And I don't know if Congress is going to do anything about that. I don't know if Trump is getting any sort of good feedback from his cabinet on how that is a bad idea, or if he even generally cares about what that looks like. I am going to say this one other thing, which is, I think we all noticed that Trump waited until the Olympics were over to bomb Iran. I mean, even Putin didn't attack Ukraine until after the Olympics were over. So we were fairly confident that the war was not going to start until after the Olympics were over. The Olympics were over, he bombed Iran. The U.S. is hosting the World Cup, which I'm sure everybody in the audience knows this at this point in time. And there have been conversations that the war will end before the World Cup. Because the World Cup is similar to the Olympics, and you probably shouldn't be at war if you're in the Olympics or if you're in the World Cup. So if you wanted a timeline, a hopeful timeline, that's one hopeful timeline. It would also mean that Trump would be able to get gasoline prices down by the summertime, which is when everybody goes on vacation and is driving. And maybe by November, which is when the midterms are, everyone will have forgotten about high prices. I don't think so. U.S. inflation is going to be significantly higher than it was before. And yeah, I hope that answers the question. Yeah, that's it. I don't necessarily have a great answer to that question.
Maybe I would just
Solo
compliment
voy a
and say,
añadir.
disculpa.
No, please, Michael.
I would just say the other thing to watch is inflation more generally, right? So to the extent that, gasoline is one thing, but general prices, and to the extent that this is contributing to inflation, we're also seeing some of the inflationary impact of the first rounds of tariffs from last year starting to hit the economy, as people are no longer absorbing it in their margin, but actually pricing up. And so some of that is already, we're coming into a higher base level of inflation due to the tariffs. We're adding inflation in gasoline and other products that require transportation. So that's another factor that could cause people to think differently about the administration and the Republican Party in the coming elections. But one never knows. We say, when I did work in politics for some while, and we used to say a week is a long time in politics. So the elections are many months away still.
Yeah. Matías.
And I should just say, Michelle, I put in the chat, but it's actually the US, Canada, and Mexico collectively hosting the World Cup. Por favor.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm obviously not going. I just know that it's somewhere in the Americas. Thank you.
Sí, no
Matías,
solo
la palabra.
decirle a Michelle que no clasificamos al Mundial, entonces no lo están siguiendo tan de cerca. Pero se filtró se filtró un audio de Ted Cruz, que es republicano, adelantando muy efusivamente de que el próximo año va a estar Trump sufriendo impeachment every week. Entonces es algo que al menos incluso en sus seguidores más cercanos lo estiman que estas acciones están derivando a que perdería la Cámara Baja y parte del Senado, y con ello sufrir estas consecuencias. O sea, esto no es solamente, como dice Michelle, de su su visión liberal, sino es algo que los propios cercanos republicanos lo ven como una posibilidad alta. Además que tradicionalmente siempre pierde el presidente incumbente, el midterm election, el normal.
Gracias, Matías. Y aprovechando que tienes la palabra, voy a volver a una parte de tu presentación. En cuanto a saber que si estimas que Chile tiene la institucionalidad adecuada para aprovechar estas oportunidades de las que hemos hablado, que puede ofrecer este cuadro geopolítico. Con el nuevo gobierno, con los cambios que se vienen, esperamos, ¿cómo lo ves tú?
O sea, yo sí lo creo, no sé si se está aprovechando a full. O sea, ¿en qué sentido? Se creó, y no me acuerdo el nombre acá, disculpa, se creó como una institucionalidad que invitaron a expertos, exministros al Ministerio de Hacienda para analizar los impactos de los aranceles que impuso Trump. Esto fue hace un año, exactamente, fue el 2 de abril hace un año, y creo que esa institucionalidad se podría aprovechar, pero no solamente reactivo. O sea, se tendría que hacer un trabajo un poco más proactivo de ir monitoreando lo que está pasando en el mundo y cómo esto puede afectar las decisiones económicas del Ministerio de Hacienda. A nivel de atracción de inversión, tienen que nombrar una nueva directora o director de Invest Chile. Me parecería que esto es uno de los focos centrales que debiera tener. A nivel de Estados Unidos, o sea, de las empresas norteamericanas, existe una visión de querer invertir más en Chile. O sea, nosotros somos el ranking número 7 en América Latina de inversión en América Latina. Y existen ahora, somos parte, algo que no éramos antes, de ciertos mecanismos como el DFC, que van a ser puede utilizar por las empresas norteamericanas para invertir en áreas estratégicas como minerales críticos, data center, infraestructura crítica, puertos, etcétera. Entonces es algo que sí también se tiene que aprovechar. Pero me parece que en términos generales, y esto es una crítica que llevo un tiempo haciendo, estamos muy atrasados de cómo analizamos los impactos globales en nuestras decisiones y nos impactamos de lo que hace una administración, cuando la verdad es casi obvio que lo va a hacer, y somos muy reactivos y estamos viviendo, como bien dijo Michelle, momentos de cambios estructurales en el mundo, cambio del orden global, y cuando suena como algo muy abstracto, pero ¿en qué se traduce? En esto. O sea, se traduce en nuevas alianzas, en nuevos focos, nuevos supply chain, y nosotros podemos estar o reaccionando constantemente o empecemos a analizar y tomar medidas al respecto.
Muchas gracias, Matías. Eso que tú mencionas, creo que no solo se aplica al mundo público, a las instituciones, sino que también al mundo privado,
Sí,
¿no? Por parte del
absolutamente.
análisis que hiciste, de la importancia de incorporar en los análisis los temas geoestratégicos, geopolíticos que no estaban antes en las agendas de nadie, diría yo. Dime,
Sí, o
Matías.
sea, solamente como complementar, la administración Trump empezó a solicitar información pública porque quiere hacer un acuerdo plurilateral. Hasta donde yo tengo entendido, como Chile no participamos, pero las empresas de cobre, de litio, en esta lógica deberían estar, pero completamente inmersos en lo que significa. ¿Qué significa? Están creando un mercado paralelo en tierras raras, mercado paralelo en litio, mercado paralelo con price floors, con mecanismos de precio, etc. Y eso no está en la discusión pública al nivel de profundidad del impacto que puede tener para Chile. Y como unos potencialmente pueden estar a favor y otros potencialmente pueden estar en contra.
Muchísimas gracias, Matías. Voy a hacer una pregunta que no hemos tocado este tema, pero ¿qué opinan ustedes del rol de China? China ha permanecido en silencio, entre comillas, ¿no? Ellos hacen sus statements, todos los días hacen sus declaraciones públicas, el ministro de Relaciones Exteriores, en fin. Pero, ¿qué opinan? ¿Qué oportunidades hay para China en esto? ¿Cómo ven el rol de China en este escenario nuevo global que se está desarrollando?
Puedo empezar porque nosotros miramos eso de muy cerca. Mira, su orientación es un poco más neutro que otros en eso. Evidentemente tenemos una dependencia también de petróleo y hidrocarburos del exterior. Están tratando tal vez de intervenir en un proceso de paz o de reducción de conflicto, pero creo que a largo plazo ese conflicto muestra la buena política de China de reducir su dependencia en petróleo importado y todos sus procesos de energías renovables y que geopolíticamente son más fuertes porque mira, no, nosotros no involucramos, no empezamos conflictos. Y tal vez de otra manera, si pensamos en el impacto en Taiwán, otra vez muestra que tal vez es más complicado que pensado tratar de tomar territorio que está muy bien entendido.
Muchas gracias, Michael. Michelle, do you have any views on what is the role of China, or what role may they play, or what are they looking at? I don't know if you have any views on that.
Yeah, so I do have some views on that. When this war first started, people thought that China was the big loser in this conflict because China is such a massive importer, and certainly, but China actually isn't the big loser in this conflict. There's a lot of losers in this conflict. China is not one of them. China has been preparing for something like this by storing oil. When oil prices were $60, they would put oil in their reserves. And so they have, like, when I said Chile has 31 days of cover left, China has like 300 days, right? So like China has a significant amount of inventories where they can live through this conflict for a very long time. That's one thing. Second, China has been transitioning out of fossil fuels, even though, by the way, they still import a significant amount of oil, but they've been transitioning out of fossil fuels into some alternative energies, including coal as well and nuclear. So China is in a good position there. And not only that, but China has stayed relatively neutral out of this conflict, mainly because they can get the Iranian barrels that they need, because Iran is still sending it there. Iran is allowing their ships to pass through. So they are in a really good spot. There is one thing China has done that has been, that, by the way, I might have to pause you for 1 second because I think I have a delivery. I'm so sorry. Hopefully he'll leave it at my door. But one thing China did do that was bad, which they are changing directions, which is China banned exports to their neighbors, which meant that left them in a diplomatic situation where they weren't able to give these exports to their neighbors, and their neighbors were now fuel constrained. They have changed that where they are using this more as a diplomatic tool now. So they're telling the Philippines, hey, we have gasoline. If you need gasoline, like, let's do this deal, right? So now they're using fuel as a hostage, as a weapon. and they're able to create these relationships with their neighboring countries, what they hadn't done before. Whereas first I was like, well, China's a bad neighbor. Now China's becoming a relatively good neighbor. And really, it looks like China is the surprising winner in this entire situation. Certainly there, when Chile says we need to have alternative fuel sources, solar panels, where are you going to go? You're going to go to China because they have the cheapest solar panels, right? So in the end, China is probably going to emerge out of this a relatively large winner. Oh, and I have one more thing to say about that. I'm so sorry. This is the other thing, which is Iran has started forcing countries that transit through the strait to pay a toll. And in addition to that, they are putting other restrictions on some of the ships that are transiting through the strait. And one of those restrictions and a toll is that nothing can be paid in US dollars. So the impact that that's going to have to the US dollar system is relatively significant. And I think that is something that the US government needs to consider, is that China can gain a foothold in the global commodity market if things start transacting in yuan instead of in US dollars.
Indeed, Michelle. Yeah, I just read about that yesterday, and I was kind of surprised, but definitely it's a new point on this what's going on. And just the last question, because we're over the time. And this has to do with Russia. I asked about China, but now Russia. How much do you think is Russia benefiting from the ongoing supply shock, given the US lifted sanctions on Russian oil?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. When the war broke out, I wrote this list of policy tools in the toolbox that the administration has to ease the pain. And the first thing I said was, you need to lift sanctions on Russian oil. And it got a lot of negative feedback because obviously you can't let Russia be the big winner in this game. And they are. They are also a big winner in this, right? And it's not just oil and oil products and natural gas, but it's fertilizer, it's food, there is a lot of things that Russia is going to win in this with higher prices that is going to allow them to basically take Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine has done a good job trying to get to bomb their infrastructure so that Russia doesn't have that leg up. But Russia certainly is another winner in this. Everything I know, and I try to stay bipartisan, but everything that has been in Trump's policy agenda, his economic agenda, I'm going to focus on the Western Hemisphere agenda, his national security strategy agenda, has been defeated by this war in Iran, this war of choice, this war that certainly didn't need to happen. And the the countries that will emerge stronger from it are not the United States.
El mismo precio de petróleo ayuda mucho a Rusia por su presupuesto nacional.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, we are past the time of the webinar, and we really appreciate your presentations. We have lots of expressions of that in the chat. People are really impressed by all the information that you have provided, all your analysis, points of view. We deeply thank you. I just wanted to mention that there was a former Minister of Foreign Affairs in our audience, someone that was very close to me because I worked with him, Jose Miguel Insulza. So I just wanted to say hello to him especially. And thank you again, Michelle, for your time. It's great meeting you. And we hope we can have you again in the near future in one of our webinars. Also, Michael, thank you so much for being with us again. We've been doing lots of things with you and all of them of great quality. And Matías, ha sido un placer tenerte con nosotros. Tremenda presentación que nos hiciste. Esperamos que disfrutes tu crucero por la Antártica y esperamos también tenerte en algún otro webinar en el futuro cercano. Muchas gracias a todos y a la audiencia que nos sigue también tan lealmente. Muchas gracias.